Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Maya, for inviting me, and thank you for getting the technology set up. And yeah, again, I am Karl Hakanson. I do ag and natural resource education for Extension in Hampton County, and I get involved in a lot of things. And before we get too far, if you take a look at that picture, that's the lovely Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, Mississippi at that point hitting the St. Croix at Prescott. And it's super dramatic how much more dirt is in the Minnesota and Mississippi River watersheds. So I'm going to jump ahead, and at one point I'm going to talk about soil health principles. And if we follow those across all that farmland, we wouldn't have that mess. So I think that's a pretty dramatic picture. And then on the right there is some healthy soil that can help prevent that. Okay, and so just a little bit about me. I'll share a little about me and a little bit about some of the work I have done and am doing now, a little bit about the history of soil erosion control, and a little bit about my work in watersheds. And then we'll talk about soil health. So I started out years ago in Wisconsin doing nutrient management, taking soil tests. On the right there, I am calibrating a manure spreader. It's a great source of nutrients, but if you don't know how much you're spreading, it's hard to know what to do with it. So we did a lot of work in watersheds. And that is some of my work. And yes, I had to tell my parents that my degree allowed me to weigh manure. Here's just some pictures of the work in Wisconsin for many years, directly with farmers, nutrient management, watershed work, farm planning, directly with farmers, all kinds of interesting people and interesting work. Go to the next slide here. Along the way, we discovered grass-based farming, managed intensive grazing. We were some early pioneers in Wisconsin forming these grazing networks. And I'll mention the network idea a little later as well. These were new farming systems based on, we took the principle that the cows have legs and the grass do not. And we learned from New Zealand and Australia about this. And that picture on the bottom left was a pasture that could barely support 10 heifers, and when it was properly managed, could support 110 or whatever it was, stock or beef, and 110 trout per mile of this stream. So it has great benefit. And the other thing we'll talk about a little later is the whole idea of networking and learning together.
Karl, this is Maya jumping in. I just wanted to mention we had a request to either speak a little louder or else move your microphone a little bit closer.
Oh, okay. Let me try the other one.
I'm not sure which one is easier. Thank you.
Yeah. Try a different headphone. Does that work? Can you hear me on there?
Sounds okay to me.
Is that better? Is that better? Okay. Okay, so grass-based agriculture came along and grazing, and then this whole idea of soil health, which we're going to talk about quite a bit later, really came to the fore. We have farmers investigating underneath the cover crop. We have Carmen Fordenholt at the university there looking at perennial wheat. And we have strip till, and on the bottom right and top right, no-till soybeans into rolled rye. So farmers trying all kinds of interesting things for soil health and reducing the impact on the environment. And we have at the U the Forever Green project. And we also have the Greenlands Blue Water project that is looking into perennialism. And the whole idea here is essentially nature as guide, mimicking nature. And there's just some amazing things happening around the world, really, but in Minnesota as well. figuring out soil health and less tillage and those sorts of things. So then I grew up in St. Paul, but coming back to Minnesota a few years back, this whole urban ag world, which was new to me. You can see some of the projects we got involved with there: composting, youth in the garden, community gardening, all kinds of interesting things. This was mostly a lot of work, these pictures from North Minneapolis. People are interested in where their food comes from. And you may have heard of this whole idea of food deserts and people lacking access to fresh food. And so, excuse me, the idea is that people aren't necessarily going to become farmers, but basically we like to say, if you eat, yeah, you're part of agriculture. And there's some really fascinating work going on in the urban environs around community gardening, land access, and that sort of thing. Go to the next slide. So along those lines, what I've created and I coordinate is the Twin Cities Metro Growers Network. So I came here and you had market growers and you've got community gardeners, you've got backyard gardeners, of course, and people growing for youth education and people doing all kinds of things. Oh, and I thought, how can I tie this all together? And I harkened back to my grazing network days, and we formed this network so that you, no matter what you're growing or why you're growing, I should say, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and you should get better at it. And we need to become better horticulturalists. So, and it takes place at people's operations, at their farms, at their gardens, at their backyards. And it's a great way for adults to learn. So we call it, I'll show you my next slide here. So instead of expert model, me standing up and talking about all these things, we go right to where people are and invite specialists. And it's really a great way to get things done. Next slide here. Yeah, so we call it peer-to-peer, informal, informative learning. And here's some of our events. Each event has a topic. The top center was tools, and the right tools, which is super important for gardening. We have seed swaps, seed shares. We look at research. So we invite some specialists or some practitioners. And that was, last year was the first year, and this year, the whole idea of networks is to get together. Well, that kind of got messed up, didn't it, with this COVID thing? So we've got 2 events so far coming up on land access and how to start a farm. And let's see, here's some more. Here's some more pictures of the kind of things that people are doing. And I collaborate on this one with the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota. It's a really great group. It was a spin-off originally of the Land Stewardship Project, which you might be familiar with. And, you know, and as you can tell, a lot of my experience is farming and that sort of thing. And I mentioned that quite a bit, but the principles are the same no matter what landscape. This one top center is Common Roots Restaurant, and they source everything locally and zero waste. It's a pretty amazing place. Here's an urban garden. This is Urban Ventures, right on the Greenway. They grow a lot of food for the community. Really interesting things going on. And then I started another network, Ecological Service Livestock Network. And this is all about using livestock as land management tools, primarily goats for buckthorn and other invasive species control. But we want to take it way beyond that. As you may know, this landscape was originally mostly savanna, and it wasn't forested. And that's because millions and millions of elk and bison and beaver and all kinds of animals were constantly eating, and Native Americans used fire. And so we worked with Sustainable Farming Association, and they had a project returning livestock to the land, and this came up. And so we've got 4 businesses that we're working with. You may have seen some of them. They're primarily on public lands, parks. Washington County, I know, is doing a great job. We have them at Theodore Worth. So goats are kind of a primitive grazer. They're browsers, actually. They eat brush as opposed to grass, like a sheep would. But they can really help manage the buckthorn and open these woods back up, get the sun hitting the ground, and start to manage it in a way that we think is much more in tune with how nature would have it, mimicking nature again. There's our network web page. Check it out sometime. We're doing some really great things. And here's all of our partners. And here's some pictures of what we're up to. Running goats through parks. And this one here, that's at the Bloomington there at the Wildlife Refuge. We have a lot of municipalities really interested in this. This is Washington County. There's Theodore Worth. It's really becoming something quite amazing. If you go, so I mentioned graze obligate landscapes. That's what these landscapes are. And you can drive by our woods and they look healthy and nice, but they're actually not. They're overloaded with nitrogen, and they're the perfect habitat for invasive species to come in. So I don't know if you can, Maya, if you can copy these links, but if you go to the original website I mentioned, this one, they'll be there. And this one here shows an incredible project in Burnsville to restore savanna. Really, really interesting. So that's some of the stuff I'm involved with. So a little bit about soil, brief history. The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Look at the size of that gully from Wisconsin, the horse there. This is the famous Dorothea Lange picture from a book called You Have Seen Their Faces from 1937. Times were tough. And this is a picture called Farmed Out. And down below here, this would have been previous. Basically what we did was we plowed the prairie from end to end and turned it into bare dirt. And the Dust Bowl was essentially a human-caused catastrophe. The prairie had been holding that dirt down for centuries. Turns out, previous to the 30s, it was kind of a wet, when people came out to originally start farming, it was kind of a historically wet period, so they did okay. But soil erosion was rampant. People, the security of the nation was at risk. I mean, it was just awful. Look at that. And that was everywhere. So, along comes a guy named Hugh Hammond Bennett. It's the 1947 picture. And he tried to get federal funding for, it was originally called the Soil Erosion Service, but that didn't sound good, so they called it the Soil Conservation Service. It's now called the Natural Resources Conservation Service, part of USDA. But interesting story, when he was going to testify in Congress, the dust storm, the Dust Bowl, came all the way from the plains and blew over DC, and dust was landing in the people's desks and in the hearing room, and he had an audience. So we've had that agency ever since. Started contour farming and rotation and all kinds of things. That made a huge, huge difference. And the investment we made then, fortunately, was huge. And it led to the productivity and prosperity of this nation. And we need to think of that again, perhaps. So long story short, we came up with all these practices. We call them BMPs, best management practices. And NRCS is kind of keeper of the practices, but cover crops, stream bank protection, there's all kinds of things that farmers can sign up for to protect their land. And it's a pretty great success story. And this is, early on, Wisconsin was kind of the world I was involved with. So in the ag world, we talk about this adopting BMPs. We tell farmers do this and do that. And landowners, and this is completely applicable to just about anything we do. So there's awareness of the problem, like in the watershed. Gee, there's a storm drain problem, or there's some kind of problem. If you're not aware, nothing's going to happen, right? And then you get interested, you want some information, you evaluate things, like if we're trying to get people to do a rain garden or something like that, or porous pavement. Then you try it out and you adopt it or not, or you adapt it, and you can reject this at any way. This is the adoption diffusion theory, and it's a simplistic way, but useful on how people do or do not do the right thing, you might say. So, and just a brief thing, you know, most of my talk is about this whole idea of runoff pollution, or what we call non-point source pollution. But it's worth remembering, I just have one page here about point sources. In the good old days, there's the Cuyahoga River famously catching on fire. And here's some guys in a boat, just drenched in oil and chemicals. That's the river. There was no laws. Companies dumped anything and everything, and we dumped all our sewage. And here is a report from MPCA talking about the history of water quality. Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the stockyards, the South St. Paul stockyards, rival Chicago, all the offal, all the guts and stuff they didn't want, they pushed it into the river. And when they started building and locking dams, well, it all gathered behind there, miles and miles of putrid awfulness. And there's a link there to an NPR story about the things we used to dump in rivers, and we don't do that anymore. So we make great progress on that front. And that's actually why we could start to think about the non-point source, because we had done, you know, this problem is largely solved. The municipal treatment plants, we're talking parts per billion of their phosphorus. So we've come a long way, but we've got a long ways to go. Now we call it the algae bowl. There's Lake Erie, got an algae bloom, first time ever. Here's a dust storm down in LA or out west somewhere. I think it was, well, it's LA Times. I'm not sure where that's from, but it was recent. And here is about 10 years ago in Minnesota, right up to the edge of the stream, huge floods. And of course, we're getting more heavy rains now. Great progress. We've got a ways to go. And here's some more pictures, all pretty recent. Here's off of a barnyard. Here's some just awful soil erosion. And this is the good stuff. This is what grows good crops. And here's the soil running away from the corn. And this, dear friends, is a lake. That's algae, the kind that makes you sick, kills your pets, and it's pretty awful. So we've had increase in farming, decrease in diversity of farms and forages and ground cover and so forth. And we're kind of going backwards. So, sources of water pollution, I'm sure you're all familiar with: crop fields, soil erosion, feedlots and barnyards. Stream banks is a big one. And again, with this increased rain, and the stream banks also increase when we tile farm fields. We basically turn up the hose and scoot the water out faster. Manure, agrochemicals, feed storage facilities, all these places contribute. And here we could, speaking of BMPs, the grass waterway would be the thing. And here's the culprit right here. Rain hitting bare soil with pretty big impact, splattering the dirt up into suspension and into the water. You know, you multiply that times a rainstorm, you can lose tons and tons in one storm, or we call it a runoff event. And of course, we have urban sources. And our lovely storm drains, as I hope you all know, are not sewers. It doesn't go to the treatment plant. They are just flood control devices. So we like to say, this makes your street lakefront or riverfront property. All this loveliness is going to go right to the nearest river in this case. So construction sites, if they're not protected, pavement in the cities, anything that gets on pavement, eroded stream banks, again, bare soils, gullies, lovely pet feces. I think people are getting the hang of that one, picking up after the pet, only because it's kind of gross not to. But oil and gas and salt is becoming an issue. Trash, illegal dumping. Yeah, this is not porous. Anything that ends up here is going to get in the water. So street hygiene we talk about. All right, so back to soils. We're going to give you a little Soils 101 class here. Soils take a long time to form, and there's the parent material, the rock, whatever the rock is, and that can vary. And there's the climate, the weathering, the sun, the rain, and that varies from around the world, obviously. There's the biota, all the organisms that do the work to really make the soils. Topography, whether it's flat or low or wet, and all of that. And then time, it takes time. And this is a link that tells more about those details. So this is the recipe for making soil. And we don't want to call soil dirt. Dirt, what gets on your shoes and you bring into the house, but that's not soil. And then we describe soils with horizons. And I won't go through them all now, but the O horizon is the stuff on top, the organic matter. And then there's this accumulation of organic matter here. And then there's the zone of leaching, and then it kind of transitions to the bedrock. Okay, and that is simply how soil is made. And so the soil scientists talk about different zones, horizons. And when you describe a specific soil, this gets way complicated. And soil scientists have all kinds of ways to describe soils. Another basic thing about soils is sand, silt, and clay are the basic building blocks. And air and water and microorganisms. And so these are the basic kinds of classified soils. And percent clay, percent silt, percent sand. And this is how they're expressed. So it's not 50-50 or 30-30-30. This is their influence on the soil. And so it's not just light soils and heavy soils or clay or sand. We have clay and silty clay and silt loam and loam. And here's the relative sizes. And we like soils in the middle here because they have good surface area, good tilth. Obviously, if it's too much clay, you can't work the darn thing. Sand, like I have some loamy sand that I farm, doesn't hold water, etc. So the different characteristics of soils. The main point here is it's not just dirt, it's different characteristics. And as I mentioned, these are the different soil orders. These are the ones in Minnesota. And these are the ones around the world. So there's these 12 soil orders. You can see just how different they look and how they react. And these mollisols are prairie soils. And these alpha soils are forested soils. These are some of our best ag soils. And these all have, all these means, I won't go into it now, you'll be glad to know, but they all have different meanings. And you can go to this website, learn more about that. But again, just to say, it's a taxonomy here, just like plants or animals. And it's fascinating. And it really determines if you could build or make a road or grow a crop or what your basic material is. And in a lot of urban areas, of course, it's been changed so much that sometimes you don't know what is there. And just to drive the point home, we have a state soil, Leicester silt loam, and it is a fine loamy mix, superactive mesic malic hapudolf. You'll be glad to know that we won't talk about that anymore, but this all means stuff to soil scientists. And there are tens of thousands of soils around the world, thousands in Minnesota. They're all unique. And here's the soil survey, Hennepin County. Every county has a soil survey. You can go to this web soil survey, and you can drill down to your property. And sometimes in really urbanized areas, it'll just say urban soil, but or something to that effect. And also counties have it. Hennepin County has a soil layer on their natural resources map as well. So you can dig into soils. There's also a state soil song. Okay, so what I learned in my soil science classes in the 80s was essentially that soil is geology and chemistry. We didn't learn much about the biology, and now we're learning that soil is actually biology, it's not geology. Without the organisms, it would not be soil. So it's really changing a lot of how we perceive agriculture and productivity. And it actually parallels our understanding of the the gut biome. We're learning about that and how that affects our health and what we eat and all of that. And actually, the two are connected. And I think we're learning it's the really small stuff that run this world, pandemics notwithstanding. And back to this biomimicry thing, small things have been around for a lot longer than us macro species. And so we have to learn how to work that. I mean, if you think of a healthy forest or a healthy prairie, it's lush and productive as can be. And nobody's applying fertilizer, nobody's spraying pesticides, right? Somehow it has inherent productivity. So we're learning about this soil food web. And I think we've learned, we're learning that we're just beginning to learn how this works. It's intricately complex. A tablespoon of soil has billions of creatures in it. And I just wanted to highlight one. Here is the mycorrhizae. Here we have a little seedling. And of course, plants have roots, but the mycorrhizae have a symbiotic relationship with the roots, and they spread out much farther. And they are very much involved in plant health and sequestering nutrients. And sometimes when we have crop and plant failures, it's because we've messed up this relationship. The plant's struggling just on its own with the roots. And I'll talk about this a little later, but that's why tillage is often really damaging. So here's some links to USDA, the NRCS I mentioned, has a soil health kind of primer, and you can read about it. It's fascinating. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Radio Lab. It's a great radio show on public radio, and they have a podcast. Check it out. From Tree to Shining Tree, they talk about the research in forests and how trees are connected with this mycorrhizae, and they communicate with each other, and they help each other during times of stress. I mean, who knew? It's fascinating. And so if we do our soil right, we can get by with a lot less disease, a lot less fertilizer, a lot less pesticides, if we just understand this better and start to work with it. And that's what's happening now in all kinds of agriculture. It's quite amazing. Take a look at that. Look at the root system on this chunk of prairie. This is from the National Geographic article, Digging Deep. So your lawn would just be this little thing here with a little bit of roots. And a wheat would be maybe this tall or something, and some roots down here. Look at this is an energy carbon system that works really well. And that's what the Forever Green initiative is trying to mimic, perennial cropping system. And I might add, no soil erosion or runoff pollution in a system like that. And here's just I hope this doesn't, this is going to fire up. My colleague, Nick Jelinski's got a great TED Talk where he talks about these things in much more eloquently than I. Been around the world, and his catchy little phrase that he learned was, we are all temporarily not soil. Think of it, we all come from the soil. The food that we eat, the chemistry in the food that makes us live and think and breathe, we all used to be soil. So that's something you might want to check out when you got the time. A really fascinating TED Talk. He's a University of Minnesota professor. Wow. I didn't mean to do that. Next slide, please. There we go. Sorry. And there's some great reads out there. This one on the right is a farmer that's kind of leading the way in running his farm according to the soil health principles. This guy here, Dave Montgomery, wrote a book, Hidden Half of Nature, talking about what's underneath in the soil. And he makes connections to the gut biome. And this is a longtime soil scientist who wrote a similar thing about a soil owner's manual, all talking about this incredible world of soil health and the soil biome and how we can use that. You know, we talk about feeding the world and all that sort of thing. This has just been opening up new worlds to everybody. So here we go. Soil health principles. This is from the Sustainable Farming Association. Back to that very first slide, if all the soil in the Midwest was managed this way, there wouldn't be dirt in that runoff. Keep the soil covered, that's number one. Cover crops, mulch. Minimize soil disturbance, limit the tillage, no-till, strip-till is what farmers do. We've learned that we've just tilled the soil to death. Increase crop diversity. Monocultures have problems. We need to help farmers find some more things to grow besides corn and soybeans. And again, all this is relative to your backyard. Keep living roots in the soil so that they can function, as I showed with that mycorrhizae. And they have glues and exudates, and they create what's called soil structure. And soils become resilient to rain and erosion. And with more rain coming, with the climate change, well, it already has been. If you look at the charts for the last 30 years in Minnesota, a lot more rain. And then keep living roots in the soil is the whole cover cropping idea. And innovate livestock, which is a tough one for gardeners. And it's also a tough one for corn and bean farmers that sold the cattle, you know, generation ago. But the manure is magic. So if we have proper soil structure, soil health, what we want to do, the basic parameters for preventing water pollution, runoff pollution, and I should mention, I'm not talking about groundwater pollution at this point, but we want to slow the water down, we want to spread it out, and we want to soak it in. And then everything in the water gets settled on the soil surface. And obviously, a piece of pavement is not going to do that. Rain garden is a great example. But here you go. This is, if we do this, our water quality will improve. Because basically, water pollution comes from the land. And it comes from runoff pollution. And here's a thing that we use to demonstrate. We got a sprayer here that sprays rain, and we have bare soil, and we have different kinds of crops and prairie, and we have covers. And basically what happens is when we have healthy crops and healthy soil, and often what we'll do is go to a fence row or a cemetery or someplace where the soil hasn't been messed with. These will fill up quicker, and they'll be dirtier because the soil will just run off. The water will just run off and take the soil with it. And there'll be varying degrees here. And the better managed soil, not much will come off, and it'll be pretty clean. And then you take this out and flip it over, and it'll be dry underneath. The water can't infiltrate. We need to infiltrate that soil, and the soil has to be porous and have aggregation to accept the water. It can't be compacted and tight. And this would let water run right through, so we can soak in way more water. So better organic matter and better soil structure. So here's a slide from years ago, just polluted runoff 101. And phosphorus is the big thing around here. That's what gives us the algae. Down in the Gulf of Mexico with the saltwater situation, the nitrogen is the thing. But it's the limiting factor for plant growth in water. If you go to the mountains or someplace where there's nothing growing, like the water is super clear, that's just because there's really nothing in there. We may have to have some nutrients in the water. And a little bit goes a long way. It takes, oh, I forget the figures, but if you increase the parts per million of phosphorus in water a little bit, the algae and plants can really grow a lot more. And we put a lot in there, hey, it really screws things up. It's the major polluter of surface water, and it comes from the land, as I mentioned, and it comes when rain falls and snow melts. Like right now, there's no runoff. There's no pollution happening. But when it rains, and it rains a lot, which we're getting more of, and the snow melts and the soil is bare, that's when we get water pollution. So we call these runoff events. So this is the biggest source of water pollution and much harder to control compared to point sources, your municipal, wastewater treatment plants and factories. That's a single pipelet, I guess what we call a point source. And you can put on controls and you can deal with that. But non-point comes from innumerable, individually inconsequential sources. So here's my little trick. When it is raining, and we run inside when it's raining, but run outside, get your rain gear on, and see where the water's flowing. And go to the gutter and see if there's anything in it. This is below a barnyard that's uncontrolled. This is, and this water, you can't tell from here, of course. Looks pretty clean. If it keeps raining a lot, there's kind of a first flush, and then it sort of cleans up. But here's a river coming out of a suburban area. This happens all the time, and you just don't see it. And so that's my little trick. So again, infiltration is the key, and soil health is how we're going to get there, and healthy plant vegetation. And I like to say, if you see soil erosion at all, it's excess erosion. Small ephemeral gullies, soil deposition. If you see a bunch of dirt like in the gutter after a rain, yeah, there's been a lot. So the heavy sand and gravel particles settle out. The good stuff, the really nutrient-rich clay and silt, keeps on going because it stays in suspension. So bare soil, think erosion, think water pollution. And as I already mentioned, infiltration occurs when it's held and slowly flows across a stable permeable surface. Water can soak in. Stable permeable surface, that'd be your healthy soil. And we can do porous pavement, and there's other kind of structural things that work as well. Rain gardens and these gravel detention ponds, off of a big parking lot. So there's other things we can do in an urbanized area, but we need to capture that water and filter it out, slow it down, so it can soak into the ground. So some basic BMPs, and I alluded to some of these. You got your garden, boy, don't till the bejesus out of it. Just till sparingly, and try not to invert the soil. There's a whole layer of bacteria that some need a lot of oxygen, some don't need much at all. And I like to use in my garden a broad fork, just loosen up the soil. And when you do till, you often just make more weeds grow. Nature abhors a vacuum, and weeds' job is to cover soil. And so you don't want to wake your weed seeds up. Pesticides should be used judiciously and sparingly, if at all. And I say no quick fixes. You can kind of screw up the system. You definitely should read the label. You're not going to get caught, but if you ever got caught doing something that wasn't on the label, then you're breaking the law. So you got to read those labels, and they're not easy to understand, but make sure kids and people people that shouldn't be messing with them aren't messing with them. But know what you're doing when you use pesticides. And pesticides is the catchword for insecticide, herbicide, fungicide. It's the catch-all term, pest. There's even aviicides for killing birds. You're really not allowed to use phosphorus anymore unless you can prove that you need it with a soil test. Because phosphorus, again, is the thing that's really polluting the water. My pet peeve, don't cut the grass short. Let it grow. The longer it is, the deeper the roots are. And the more the soil will be healthier. They say 3 foot minimum. My lawn, I do 4 and 5 inches. It just grows a more healthy system, I think. And then this is something I'm just starting, but diversified lawn, there's a lawns to legume pollinator project that we can get funding for. Homeowners can get funding for through the Blue Thumb, and I'll mention that in a bit. And right now with the dandelions, you know, it's just kind of a mine. Some people love their green lawns, go for it, you know. But hey, it's a beautiful wildflower, and the pollinators just love it right now. And you don't have to rake up all those leaves and grass. I got mulching mowers work great. Set them high and just mulch all that stuff down. I mean, obviously if you have too much, but that really works. And then the other thing, compost. I did a video. There's a picture of my hands holding my compost that I make in the backyard. All you need is grass clippings, leaves, and kitchen scraps, and water. And you can make your own compost. And you don't have to buy fertilizer, and you can put it around your shrubs and on your grass. Little work involved, obviously, but this is a great way to invigorate your soils and increase the health of your soil. And I don't have to put all that stuff in the garbage. I got lucky. I got a free lawnmower that has a bagger. Normally a bagger, I think, not a good idea. You don't want to throw away your grass and leaves, but I use that to churn up the leaves and the grass and help layer my compost. Leaves on their own are kind of rough. They can kind of mat down and don't let the water through. But anyway, a mulching mower is a great tool. And if you want to learn more about composting, give me a call. You want to do the greens and the browns, and add water and mix. And this is what you get. It's wonderful. And you guys, Watershed smart people, you know about these, but I threw those in. Street pavement hygiene. You know, wash your car in the grass or at the parking car wash. Don't walk with the pavement. That's kind of a no-brainer, but you see it all the time. You got to keep stuff off the pavement, off the streets. Coarse pavement is something that's used. We talked about yard waste management. I take a lot of my leaves and I just rake them under the bushes. You don't need to rake everything up and get rid of it. It's good organic matter and it's good habitat, especially in the fall. Leave sticks and things. The bees go in there. The minor bees. Rain gardens, you know about, which is a detention pond for homeowners, and then there's the big detention pond swales for more municipal, commercial, structured set erosion, so forth and so on. So there's a lot of things we can do, and people are catching on to it, I would say. And so one thing about this whole idea of BMPs, you know, we're all told what we should do. You should do this, and you should do that, and you know, you should eat this, and you should not eat that, and you should do this and do that. You shouldn't smoke, right? It's a terrible thing, and people still smoke. Well, if we want to make changes in the community, it's more than just, and that's what we studied with farmers. You can't just tell them, here, do this. It's got to be in context, and there's got to be a community around it, and we have to sort of learn by doing, learning in context, teaching young people how to do things. It's great. This is from your Facebook page, the whole storm sewer thing. That's just so great. You start to make the connections between what you're doing on the land, the water, and the sewers, and you take care of your community. So there's this whole idea that really it's psychology is involved in human nature, and it's a great book. I'd recommend. PCA published it, Psychology of Sustainable Behavior. I mean, why do we do what we do? Why are you all interested in the watershed? What made that happen? And so she talks about that. And I like to say we are kind of monkey see, monkey do people. And so it's great that what you're doing, bringing people together and learning together. These things take time. So there's some organizations here that you're probably familiar with. Freshwater Society, I worked with them years back. Blue Thumb, they've got this great turf alternative site, and they're offering the, I think it just missed the round, but they'll have another round as lawns to legumes. I think you get $300 or something. But you know, that's $300 to buy seed and whatnot. Great River Greening is a great organization working along the river. Friends of Mississippi, likewise. I would encourage you to check out their website, Metro Blooms. Works with Blue Thumb. and then get to know these folks. Because your city and county, and DNR and Bowser, Board of Water and Soil Resources, NRCS, SWCD, in Hennepin County, SWCD is the Hennepin County Environment and Energy. But here's the operative word. It's not the county or the city or the DNR. It's yours too. Give them a call. And then there's private landscaping businesses. And there's Master Garden Program. And there's a Master Water Steward Program that Fresh Water does. And we also have a Master Naturalist Program. Really, really great stuff. Really, really great programs, I should say. And here is your lovely Watershed District, and they have grant money available. I encourage you to check it out, and maybe Maya at the end can say a little bit more about that. And here's a couple quotes that I like. And if you don't know who Elder Leopold is, I suggest you read Sand County Almanac. Sand County was actually Sauk County, Wisconsin, where I work, and the Leopold Foundation is there. Kind of the father of not land conservation, but ecological restoration. He's a really great thinker, and this is one of my favorite articles he wrote, Farmers Conservation. Conservation is the positive exercise of skill and insight, not merely a negative exercise of abstinence and caution. Prudence never kindled a fire in the human mind. I have no hope for conservation born of fear. And echoing that is my good friend Dick Cates, who's a farmer and agriculturalist in Wisconsin. And, you know, again, working with farmers, oh God, this is just a burden, all this conservation stuff I have to do. But it's not a set of constraints. It's an opportunity, and it should be a positive part of life. And I think you all are doing that. So I'll just end with this little shot. I mentioned I'm trying to figure out how to grow a nicer lawn, but this was just this morning. I think it looks great. I know some people think that just looks terrible, but I wasn't there more than 15 seconds, and there was bees. And they're just coming out and they're hungry. So, you know, we got to get along with nature and stop trying to subdue nature, right? So I thought that was kind of fun. And these go away, you know. If there's some too many someplace, maybe I'll pick some, but it goes away, and then I'll get clover in here. I get that white clover. So I said hi, and it looks great. And we don't do anything on this. We don't. It's just, you know, so we're going to, little by little, we're going to plant flowers and so forth. I thought you might enjoy seeing that. So that is a quick rundown of soil science, soil health, non-point source pollution, and I hope it stirred some interest, some curiosity, and lots of questions.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. I think it was great for us to hear some of the themes that we talk about often as a watershed district, but kind of with a new twist and that more soil focus. So I'm just looking through our chat function and gonna try to group some of the questions together and pose those to you in a way that we don't have to go through each question individually. So I think the first theme that I would just bring up is urban agriculture. So in the chat, ML had mentioned a question about agriculture and kind of asking what are some best management practices for safeguarding human and environmental health with a rise in popularity in urban agriculture. So what can people do to make sure that as we are finding more people farming and doing things like that in urban and suburban areas to make sure that we are protecting soil health and environmental health?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I forgot to mention that Nick Jelinski, fellow that was on that TED Talk, he and some grad students are working on that issue of, okay, so if we're going to do more urban ag, more community garden, what are the environmental impacts, positive and negative, of doing that? And he's done research on, you know, some urban sites can be contaminated. He's done some looking into lead, and I know Minneapolis will test the lead and arsenic for you. And those are kind of the two markers. I mean, you can't test for every possible thing. And one thing I remember is be careful of the soil within 10 feet of old wood houses, because they were scraping the paint and then full of lead. And lead it's a heavy metal. It doesn't get in the plants, but it's in the dirt and in the dust. And if kids especially are breathing the dust, they can get a lead dosage. Basically, I mean, people are concerned about that. And if you've, if you get some leaves, grass, and it's been sprayed, sometimes that can affect the compost or the plants, depending on what's growing there. And we certainly don't want people, so a garden can be a place where water soaks in, and it can be a place of pollinator habitat and diversity. But if we have it in such a way that the water's eroding and running into the street, well, that's just like on a farm, and that's no good. And also, on a little garden, you can just get, a lot of compost and fertilizer, and you can overdo it. And you can make that soil really super rich in phosphorus and potassium. And then it becomes a real kind of a hot, you definitely don't want that eroding. So it's kind of easy to overdo it with fertilizer on a small spot. So those are some of the things that people are concerned about.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think urban agriculture is a really interesting one. Someone had brought up in the chat, along with baking bread, that's the thing that a lot of people are turning to right now.
Well, yeah, it was hard to get seeds. Some companies stopped selling to gardeners just to focus on farmers. So I hope some good comes out of this. People kind of thinking about where their food comes from in a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Moving on to a next question here. Dorothy had asked in the chat about determining soil holding capacity for water during storms and runoff events. So how to determine what to do based on type of soil and slope and other conditions.
Oh, okay, yeah. You can take a piece of pipe that's maybe 4 inches in diameter. It's a infiltration test, and it's calibrated, but you drive that baby into the ground, and you leave about an inch sticking up or 2, and you fill it with water, and you time how long it takes for the water to soak in. And I could look that up and give you the more details, but you can definitely do that. One thing that happens, for example, if it's been a drought, and soil just gets hard and dries up under drought, and then you have a big gully washer, it's flowing across. That's why we like the gentle rains at first to kind of get the soil working. But the more organic matter and the more that you have living roots and so forth, and then the grass and plants just make a physical barrier. But if you get too much rain, then it just starts to flow over the top. But in that case, with the heavy grass, it's not taking anything with it. But there is a way to test infiltration. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think that'll be helpful. And you had mentioned kind of in that answer about, plants holding the soil in place. I saw that Dorothy had asked a question about that, and as well, if there are any soil studies that we could use to show that retaining trees or other natural habitat would help, like what sort of resources to point to convince developers or others to try to hold as much of that in place.
Well, sure. And a tree, of course, intercepts all the rain, so you want to stop that impact of hitting the ground. But I mentioned the whole invasive species thing. Some of the forested areas are so thick with plants that the ground is bare, and you can get a lot of erosion underneath there once the water starts flowing. So part of it with developers, boom, they come in with their equipment and and rip everything up and compact. We try to work with contractors, but they're building houses and stuff. They're not worrying about soil. Then they come in and put some topsoil, and boom, you're all done. So it takes a while for the soil to kind of reconnect and for those compacted layers to open up. But that's what roots can do, and trees and brush and so forth. But I can't, I don't have any citations right offhand, but there's a lot of research looking into the infiltration rates of prairie and forest versus bare soil versus corn versus no-till corn. Basically, I just gave you the scenario of less runoff to more. So you know, some of our lawns can get pretty compacted, and that's why people sometimes do that aeration thing. You know, they go by and plug out the holes, and that's just because it's root bound. That's not really a soil health thing, but that'll help infiltrate more water. But I think it'd be really fun to look. I would like to explore this native lawn more.
Yeah, great. And just to comment on that from the Watershed District perspective, in terms of the trees and the soil health, we are working on hopefully trying to get another webinar later on this summer to continue this into a series. And so we're working on trying to do something around the benefits that trees provide to our landscape in all sorts of ways. But a big one of that would be, you know, through intercepting water and through the soil health component.
Oh, absolutely. And if you, and I could follow up later, Maya, if you want to send me that question, and we could. I'm sure I could find more information, more specific on that.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. We can include some of that in a follow-up email as well.
Or somebody at the U that could speak at the next session or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to jump around in questions here just for the sake of time. I see that Jan had asked in the chat about soil and carbon sequestration, and if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'm surprised I didn't mention that. This soil health principle of not tilling, and the prairies weren't tilled for who knows how long, and they had feet and feet of organic matter. When you till the soil, you aerate it and you introduce oxygen and you kind of burn up the carbon. And so modern ag is carbon negative. But if we integrate livestock, and that's a tricky one because methane from cattle is a greenhouse gas, but we can suck the carbon, just a non-technical way of saying it, back into the soil. So we can, and what this gave Brown and other farmers, they're increasing their organic matter faster than we thought by introducing cover crops, introducing cattle, not tilling. And so there's some really interesting studies, if you've seen the report on drawdown, how we can draw down the carbon. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the solution, a lot of the problems and the solutions are agricultural ones. So if we follow these soil principles, not only will we clean up that Mississippi River going into St. Croix, but we can bring back a lot of the carbon into the dirt, which was, so we had coal and oil and natural gas producing carbon in the atmosphere. But another one that you don't hear so much about was all the plowing in the world that released carbon. So yeah, that's a big one.
Great. And I'm just going to ask one final question to kind of close up here. V had asked in the chat, what BMP has the biggest impact on soil health in the suburban property? So if there's one thing that each of us could do, make a change on the property, what would that one or two things be that could have the best impact?
To improve soil health?
Yeah.
Well, I would say get away from the monoculture of grass if we can, and plant some kind of diverse landscape. Native flowers and grasses are great. Incorporating compost. If any of you guys are backyard chicken folks, that's just fabulous for making compost. Incorporate that. Generally, stick to the native species, but not always. But some of our beautiful flowering plants don't do much for pollinators. You want diverse species. You want to keep it covered. Definitely don't ship your grass and leaves off to the landfill. And it takes time. None of this. That was kind of my pesticide comment. Is there's no quick fix on any of this stuff. But I think native landscaping can do wonders.